Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of DC Studios Creature Commandos, all 7 episodes of Season 1, which just ended with an incredible finale episode that connects all the dots, and we're going to break down all of the DC Easter eggs, the animation details, the deeper meaning to the heartbreak of the series, and just some insights into James Gunn's plans for the DCU. This video is going to go through each of the 7 episodes, but since we already broke down episodes 1 and 2 in another video, the first 2 chapters of this video will be the breakdowns that we already did, and then the new analysis will start with the episode 3 chapter. We wanted to include everything in one big video, and here it is. So let's start with episode 1, the Collywobbles. We open with the official new DC Studios title bumper showing a classic Superman breaking out of chains. This showed up before the Super/Man Christopher Reeve documentary, which James Gunn considered really the overture to his upcoming DC slate. The Superman here is in his original suit design from Joe Shuster's 1938 Action Comics #1 cover art, with the S emblem with the yellow border, a bit of blue tones in his hair, and trunks so shaded in shadow that they initially appear all black. Schuster didn't add the black field to the chest emblem until Superman #4 in 1940. This design also inspired the Max Fleischer Superman animation, but the hair and face of this Superman are thinner and just more penciled like Schuster's original design, and I love it. Episode 1 opens in Belle Reve Correctional Center, which has the same layout as what we saw in 2021's The Suicide Squad that Gunn directed. That film was somewhat connected to Zack Snyder's DCEU, as it featured the returns of Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, Viola Davis's Amanda Waller, Joel Kinnaman's Rick Flag Jr., and Jai Courtney's Captain Boomerang, and we are greeted by the news service GBS, which was also in Snyder's DCEU, the Galaxy Broadcasting System. This newscaster is voiced by CNN's Jake Tapper. He reports on the Sons of Themyscira invading Pokolistan. In the comics, the Sons of Themyscira were the male sons of the Amazonians who were abandoned by their mothers at birth. Notably, they had some genuine gripes with Amazonians, as they are basically abandoned children and eventually get massacred by them. Here, they just seem to be regular human guys with some sus yet familiar politics. Pokolistan is a fictional country in the DC Comics. It's a fragment broken off from the Czech Republic, first introduced in Superman the Man of Steel #109 in 2001. Cersei is a Wonder Woman villain from the DC Comics, known for several sorceress abilities, but might be best known for turning people into human/animal hybrids, her Ani-Men. And yes, there's a Marvel version of Ani-Men that was referenced recently by James Gunn in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The newscaster, voiced by Tapper, calls her a reputed sorceress, despite the fact that she's definitely casting spells in the B-roll here, and says that she claims to be the rightful ruler of Themyscira, referring to the country as the perhaps mythical, perhaps real, all-female island nation. Part of Gunn's upcoming slate is Paradise Lost, a live-action series set on Themyscira. It sounds like the outside world here still doubts its existence, and we have to remember that despite the fact that this is an animated version of all of this, because they wanted to be able to depict non-human characters, and characters like Dr. Phosphorus are just much easier to render in animation than they are in live action, the rules of this world apply to the rules of the live action world that Gunn is still building out. So we can imagine Rick Flag Sr. would be played by Frank Grillo in the same way that Amanda Waller is still played by Viola Davis. And the fact that Alan Tudyk is playing Clayface on this show might indicate that Alan Tudyk is going to be playing Clayface in the live action version of the character in any future Batman movie. Cersei's Metropolis PD number is number 42569. I feel like someone's birthday might be April 25th, 1969. The Sons of Themyscira fire an RPG at a gas station with Cyrillic letters suggesting Pokolistan is a former Soviet republic in this world. The letters here translate to something like gas station, and notice how the cost per liter seems low depending on what the local currency and inflation is, but many former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan in our world are rich in petroleum, and that is what Amanda Waller says is the case for Pokolistan. The douchey sons flanking Cersei have some, let's call them J6-esque masks. The one with the skull mouth might be a nod to El Diablo, who we saw in the David Ayer version of Suicide Squad. They interview someone by the name No Soy Boy 86. He's voiced by Alan Tudyk, and Critical Skeptic Facts of Her Feelings 91. He's voiced by Tony Cavallero, who's a hilarious Groundlings alum whom you might know from Righteous Gemstones. This broadcast is watched by Rick Flag Sr., who's voiced by Frank Grillo, and Amanda Waller, voiced as always by Viola Davis. Rick Sr. is the father of Rick Flag Jr., who is played by Joel Kinnaman in the 2021 The Suicide Squad and the David Ayer Suicide Squad from 2016. In the most recent film, he was killed by Peacemaker. The elevator goes down past the basement levels to at least 2 levels of XX. Flag says,
I thought Congress put a stop to all Task Force X activities since your daughter outed you.
This is a reference to the end of Peacemaker Season 1, in which Leota, revealed to be, spoiler warning, Amanda Waller's daughter, leaked all of her mother's secrets. We learn now that this led to government regulation, but only for Task Force X using humans and metahumans, but doesn't cover this gray area loophole of using what Amanda Waller considers to be non-humans. In the DC Comics, the Creature Commandos were a military squad from World War II, introduced in Weird War Tales number 93 in 1980, made up of human human leader, Lieutenant Matthew Shreve, GI robot, 2 different versions, Jake and Jake 2, and a Gorgon named Dr. Mira Rhodes, aka Dr. Medusa, as well as a werewolf named Warren Griffith, and Private Elliot Lucky Taylor, who survived stepping on a landmine, but now, as a result, looks like Frankenstein's monster, as well as Sergeant Velcro, who, like a vampire, can change into a bat and requires human blood to sustain his life. The team was reintroduced in a modern comic miniseries in 2000 with a few new members, but the version in this series seems mostly based on the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. run, which introduced Father Time, who led S.H.I.E.L.D., as well as Dr. Ray Palmer, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dr. Nina Mazursky, the vampire Vincent Velcro, Warren the Werewolf again, the Mummy Kalis, and Matthew Shreve. James Gunn, though, has tweaked the lineup here. We meet this lineup starting with the Bride, who's voiced by Indira Varma, who played Ilaria Sand in Game of Thrones and her role in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Her dossier reads, Type Corpse, Origin Unknown, but that origin is revealed in episode 2. Number 154372. The Bride of Frankenstein was a member of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. starting in 2011. She reads Young Love magazine, the headline being, My ex is toxic, but he's hot, which is a pretty great joke because her ex would be Erik Frankenstein, someone who is quite toxic, but known for being engulfed in flames. Fire bad. Next, Dr. Phosphorus, voiced by Alan Tudyk, who will also voice Clayface later in the series, and he voiced Clayface in the Harley Quinn animated series. Dr. Phosphorus is a lesser-known Batman villain who got his powers from a crack in a radioactive power plant he tried to build in Gotham City. I love how the animators incorporate the Kirby Crackle effect into the character's flaming skin. Kirby Crackle refers to the artistic convention originating with Jack Kirby, in which a field of black is used to represent negative space around unspecified kinds of energy. Here, his dossier reads 565477A. James Gunn has also added, of course, Weasel to this lineup. Weasel voiced by Sean Gunn, who also voices GI Robot. Weasel escaped on Corto Maltese in the post-credit scene of 2021's Suicide Squad, and Waller does mention Project Starfish here, referring to that incident with Starro. Waller put Weasel initially on the distraction team, the team that was meant to die, and Weasel couldn't even swim. He coughs up and licks back up one of the Jenga bricks. Waller says Weasel has what it takes to survive, and Rick Sr. makes a face, recalling that Rick Jr. did not survive this mission. Rick Sr. moves on to the next member, GI Robot. Now in the comics, there have been 6 individual GI robots. This one has a 2 on his helmet, so it might be Jake 2, who spent time with the Creature Commandos, but was actually the 4th GI robot. James Gunn has said that this summer's Superman film has been done with the same technology that they could use to portray GI Robot in live action. Again, just because this is animated doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to the world that James Gunn is building. GI Robot sees a swastika in the Jenga bricks, even connecting dots on long flat pieces that don't have proper segments to form the symbol from his perspective, which is such a funny detail that just shows that this guy is gonna reach to see Nazi enemies wherever he can. GI Robot's dossier appears to be in binary computer code from like an Alan Turing era World War II computing device. And lastly, Nina Mazursky, voiced by Zoe Chow, a Gillman/mermaid hybrid. Her dossier reads, Type, is this a fish? Waller names the group Task Force M, and Project M was the name of the program that created the Creature Commandos in the original 1980 comics. The opening credits also list David Harbour as Erik Frankenstein. We'll meet him later. James Gunn also puts an animated version of himself in this opening sequence as he's writing a script page. My man, come on, I love you, but you gotta admit, this is a bit vain. I mean, at least the version of Matt Groening in The Simpsons is like a drunk old coot who licks shot glasses and fires a magnum at the camera crew. But if you look closely, James has on his laptop a final draft layout showing the final scene of every episode. In this case, it's the scene that introduces Frankenstein, and we see him writing, tears fill his eyes, and Frankenstein saying, my bride. On the Osprey, Weasel has to be strapped down because remember, in the Project Starfish mission, he nearly drowned when he jumped off. The song we hear is My Gypsy Autopilot by Gogol Bordello. Gogol Bordello is an American punk rock band from Manhattan composed of musicians from around the world whose songs are inspired by Romani and Ukrainian music. It seems like James Gunn used them to include songs in several episodes. The royal security escorts them, and while they drive through the slums, the palace is gilded and opulent, which is sadly the case in many former Soviet republics like Turkmenistan. The successive portraits of past royal families look very inbred and rough, including even their dog. This recalls a visual gag in Pixar's WALL-E, the successive generations of Axiom captains who transition from photorealistic to animated and flabby. They meet Princess Ilana Rostovic, voiced by Maria Bakalova, another collaborator of James Gunn's, as she voiced Cosmo, the space dog, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Rick Sr. is so smitten with Ilana that he doesn't realize how invasive it is that she knows his middle name is weirdly Bill, not William. I'm thinking she might be like a villain of this show. Keep an eye on her. All of the Chief Guards references are dated since this country just gets its culture from the Western world pretty late. He references the Jamie Kennedy experiment, the Super Bowl shuffle, what's up, and where's the beef? And each of these things are just like from completely different decades. I mean, where's the beef is very old. Super Bowl shuffle was like from the 80s. I love how all the members of the team eat differently. Weasel houses the entire turkey. Dr. Phosphorus sizzles his meat and then bites and tosses it. The bride just chugs the wine. GI Robot, of course, eats nothing. And Nina floats some broccoli up to her mouth. This episode's title, The Collywobbles, comes up here.
But just seeing it is enough to give me the collywobbles. You're right.
So this episode is really just referring to how blinded Rick Flag Sr. is by just the beauty and the pomp here. GI Robot tells Nina,
GI Robot has been waiting for a friend to kill Nazis with for 74 years, 23 days, and 52 minutes.
So World War II ended in 1947, and this show takes place 2 years after the Suicide Squad. No matter how you do the math here, GI Robot continued to kill Nazis for several years after the war, and you know what? That tracks. I bet this dude was piling up bodies in Argentina. In the comics, the Jake versions of GI Robot were actually created by Professor Mazursky, who was Nina's father. She later tells the bride that her father was a scientist, but nothing like Victor Frankenstein. So GI Robot might actually be bonding with like his sister here in a way. Princess Alana disrobes and tries to make a move on Rick Sr., but he rebuffs her and leaves GI Robot to guard the door, probably because he's the only one of them with no sex drive. And GI Robot just declares how many Nazis he killed in each month of World War II. June 1944, Normandy, 38 dead Nazis. September 1944, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, 92 dead Nazis. October 1944, the Battle of Aachen, 14 Nazis. So that means GI Robot was part of the Normandy invasion and then pushed toward Germany. Hurtgen Forest was 12 miles outside of the city of Aachen, so it's possible that he just fought in all of these battles. The bride hails a taxi and gives the driver directions in the native language.
Znajdź lika de staruta imienia na Frankenstein.
Yeah, that last word was definitely Frankenstein. She's telling him to go to Victor Frankenstein's mansion. Meanwhile, Dr. Phosphorus goes through all of Rick's stuff, and when he's caught, he looks over to see Rick Sr.'s bulge, and then eyes appears. Like John Cena and Peacemaker, Rick Sr. is just a jack dude of a certain age, sporting white briefs. The song that starts playing here is Gogo Bordello's Mala Vida. They fight, and it's pretty great action animation. Dr. Phosphorus removes both gloves to spread as much fire as possible, causing them to crash down into the kitchen, and Rick, after burning his body on both Dr. Phosphorus and then his hands on the stove, smartly pops on an oven mitt to slam Doc's head. And I love this detail. Dr. Phosphorus grabs a measuring cup of water and I think quickly superheats it before splashing it on Rick's face, because you can hear a little sizzle sound as it's boiling. Across the street from the Frankenstein mansion, the neighbor woman calls Erik Frankenstein, and a shirtless Zac Efron is her background wallpaper. There was some speculation before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that James Gunn might have been considering Zac Efron for Adam Warlock, and Gunn very aggressively shot it down as nonsense. Now our researcher Noah translated the Cyrillic letters here on the phone context. The first one is Irina Dimitrova, then Peter Dobrev, then Ivan Filipov. There's actually a Russian writer by this name, and then the fourth one is Erik Frankenstein, and then Kosta Kazarov. Eric answers while he's on a yacht, and the shirt he's wearing kind of looks like Quagmire's shirt from Family Guy, or maybe he's trying to go for Dale from Rescue Rangers. The song over the credits is Jodan Vina by Korblekani, which is a Finnish folk music band. Okay, on to episode 2, The Tourmaline Necklace. We open in 1831 over segmented body parts that would be pieced together to form the bride, taken from several corpses. Erik Frankenstein is demanding a wife.
Shall each man find a wife for his bosom, and each beast have his mate, and I be alone?
This is a direct quote from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, published in 1818. Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster were introduced into pop culture from Mary Shelley's novel, which was considered historically the first horror novel. The monster character of Frankenstein was brought into DC Comics in 1948 in Detective Comics number 135 by Edmund Hamilton and Bob Kane. Batman Comics used a lot of public domain figures for the Rogues Gallery. There's been a few different versions of Frankenstein in DC Comics over the decades, and the version for the Creature Commandos is likely more based on the versions first introduced in 2005 by Grant Morrison and Dub Mankey, who would go on to be a member of the Creature Commandos and Shade. Eric threatens to kill Victor's wife. In Mary Shelley's original story, the creature does kill Victor's wife, Elizabeth, on their wedding night by strangling her. Eric angrily slams the lab tables and one severed head rolls on the ground. This will be the head that he picks up as part of the bride's future face, and notice the skin is lacerated on the exact diagonal where the second patch of skin will later have to connect to form the rest of her face, explaining that discoloration. For the opening credits of episode 2, the script page that James Gunn finishes writing is once again the final shot of this episode, when the bride bleeds out and Nina says, "Go yourself," and we see his exposition that he writes, the butt of a gun coming at her face. Ilana nurses Rick Sr.'s burns and wounds, getting him to disrobe. Again, I don't trust Princess Ilana, especially considering how much her family benefits from this insane wealth gap with the rest of the population and whatever is going on with her aging mother. Back in the flashback, Eric holds up a bouquet of daisies. Later, we see him extending just one to the bride, which is a nod to the 1931 Boris Karloff scene in the Frankenstein film when the girl Maria gives the monster a daisy before he throws her in a lake. think James Gunn loves this moment and referenced it with Groot, with the little girl on Nowhere in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy. Victor, voiced by Peter Serafinowicz, has also worked with James Gunn in the past. In 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, as part of the Nova Corps, Victor explains that unlike most newborns who had 9 months to acquaint themselves with existence in their mother's womb, the bride went from nothing to something in an instant, so this is more of a shock. And she imprints on Victor with his gentle caress, but then Erik scares her. In 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein, the bride there too initially rejects Frankenstein and clings to Henry. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Whenever the calendar ticks over to a new year, it's hard not to reflect on where you are now versus where you were a year ago. Is your situation better? Is it worse? Is it the same? And more importantly, how do you feel about that? But expectations to make immediate dramatic life changes in 2025 can be overwhelming. Talking to a therapist on BetterHelp can help you break down vague feelings of being behind into specific addressable concerns and develop tools to measure progress on your own terms. Starting with BetterHelp is as easy as ordering gifts on Amazon. Just fill out a questionnaire and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple days. If the first therapist doesn't feel like the right fit, you can easily switch to another one until you find someone you resonate with. BetterHelp also provides a journal for personal reflection, plus group sessions on a variety of topics that are available every day. Users love BetterHelp. They have over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, and it's obvious why. BetterHelp makes sure therapists on their platform are well qualified. If you have any questions, their customer support team is there to help as well. Start fresh any day of the year with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/newrockstars and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Like in the movie Poor Things, Victor teaches Bride how to speak words like apple and hat, and he gives her the titular Tourmaline necklace. The sons of Themyscira and Cersei hear about the address, and Cersei tosses her crushed beer can, and we match cut on a bloody bandage going in the bin in the bathroom. We find out Rick Sr. toured in Desert Storm, and he gives in. The song that plays while they hook up is Raise the Dead by Caravan of Thieves, a gypsy swing band from Connecticut. Dr. Phosphorus tells the guard outside to give Flag at least 30 seconds to finish, and it seems like he can understand Weasel's grunts here, which reminds me of the relationship between Rocket and Groot, how Rocket can just kind of understand what I am Groot means. As Frankenstein's frustration at the bride's rejection of him grows, he starts choking Victor. This was the creature's classic move in Mary Shelley's novel, and I love the framing of the shot on the ground with Victor's broken glasses in the foreground. After Erik runs away, when Victor teaches Bride wooden horse, he pretends to have a mustache.
I am a silly, mustachioed man.
Yes, doesn't he look rather like the palace guard? Cersei attacks Bride, and the music here is Start Wearing Purple by Gogol Bordello, again starts playing. And the song Wearing Purple is a phrase that the singer would tell his girlfriend when they were fighting, as they had a next door neighbor who was a little crazy and always wore purple. Bride uses her impressive strength to lay out the sons of Themyscira. On the balcony, we see Victor had his family crest, a coat of arms that includes the Cados's staff, a symbol that means physician here. As Cersei and the bride fight, Bride is brought back to the memory of having sex with Victor, and there is some nip here. So obviously, Max ain't afraid to show nudity in this show. When Bride was first brought to life in this same lab, she coughed up bile. Now she spits up blood. Bride kicks Cersei's groin and cracks her belt crystal, and Cersei transfigures the bride's arms into wavy balloons, and she bleeds into the rain puddle and remembers the moment Erik Frankenstein killed Victor. They fight, and she kicks him into the fire. Fire bad. And then American Wedding by Gogol Bordello starts playing over this great montage of Erik and Bride throughout history and around the world. Starting with 1852 in Paris, he offers her a single daisy like the 1931 Boris Karloff Frankenstein flower exchange. 1880, an American Western saloon. Notice how Frankenstein is dressed like Clint Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 1895 in the Sahara Desert. Then 1912 underwater, they're wearing old school diving outfits. 1912 underwater, were they on the Titanic and there were diving suits that they like tumbled into the water wearing? 1923 at a Jazz Age burlesque show. 1941 World War II, and hey, we gotta wonder if they might have crossed paths with G.I. Robot. 1964 on top of a bus, and to me that kind of looks like in Hollywood. 1991 they're in a club called the Reptile Room, and I think this might be a nod to the Viper Room, which is a Sunset Strip club where River Phoenix died in 1993. And by the way, I made a whole video on the channel Elseworlding about Tobey Maguire's career based on that night, and all of you hated it. And then on the stage, an animated cameo from Eugene Hutz himself, the lead singer of Gogol Bordello, and we see how Erik Frankenstein's shirt is the same one Rick Flag Jr. wore in The Suicide Squad, except Eric's was black and Rick's was yellow, and it features a bunny with a sign saying obstacles are opportunities in Portuguese. And then they're on Wall Street at the New York Stock Exchange, where it's like very 80s Gordon Gekko. Then in the Victorian age, and then on Woodstock, and hey, there's a cameo from Shaggy from Scooby-Doo smoking a joint. Just a reminder that James Gunn wrote the live-action Scooby-Doo film where Matthew Lillard played Shaggy. Then in Japan, where they're dressed in the classic samurai garb, and then at a punk show where Eric's shirt is the mighty Crabjoys. They knock each other out, and the bride is left in the rain crying, broken, laying beside Nina. The song during the credits is On pas till du dors by Kaiser's Orchestra. The song title means Dance Till You Die. Okay, moving on to episode 3, Cheers to the Tin Man, a GI robot-centered episode. Similar to series like Lost, episodes 2 through 7 of this season intercut from the present timeline events to point-of-view flashbacks of each of the characters, which gives us new, very sad context to their present battles and creates some incredible visual parallels in the animation. We open with Rick Flag, Alexei, Dr. Phosphorus, Weasel, and GI Robot arriving at the Frankenstein estate to rescue Nina and the bride from the sons of Themyscira and Circe. The opening shot is literally a boot on the ground, recalling a kind of military invasion like what GI Robot went through in World War II. While Weasel face plants in the puddle, GI Robot brings up the rear, and they included some little metallic clanks on each of his steps to differentiate him from the others. I also love the little detail after Rick tells GI Robot to stand down, and he takes it as a literal order to aggressively sit, shoving Weasel into Dr. Phosphorus and burning Weasel to release a little yelp. GI Robot then flashes back to a World War II mission. GI Robot is with Easy Company, an army unit in World War II, which if you watch Band of Brothers a half a dozen times like any real American should, you'll know and respect quite well. Sergeant Frank Rock leads Easy Company here, and in the comics, he was one of the first Task Force X leaders. Sergeant Rock calls GI Robot Tin Man since in the mid-1940s, the biggest movie of the time would have been The Wizard of Oz. He's voiced by Maury Sterling. Now, there actually is currently a Sergeant Rock movie in development at DC Studios with Daniel Craig set to star as Sergeant Rock, with Luca Guadagnino directing the film with a script by the same writer who wrote Challengers. So what battle was this? There is no snow on the ground, and their sleeves are rolled up, so it's likely sometime in summer 1944, just a few months after the Normandy invasion. In episode 1, GI Robot lists several battles that he was present for, including the Battle of Hurtgen.
I fought at the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. A whopping 92 dead Nazis.
Now, while Easy Company was not at that battle in our universe, maybe in the DCU they were. However, later in the bar, you'll notice there are Christmas wreaths everywhere, so maybe this is during the Battle of the Bulge, which Easy Company was at, that took place between December 16th, 1944 to January 25th, 1945. The Easy Company sniper is Louis Kiahani, aka Little Sure Shot, an Apache sharpshooter from the comics who also appeared in this group. The burly soldier in the tank top is Horace Canfield, aka Bulldozer. We also see in this episode Easy Company members Harold Shapiro, aka Wildman, Canary, and Four Eyes. There's also a mention of another one who I'll get to in a bit. And the German officer who shouts in the scene is voiced by Flula Borg, who played Javelin in James Gunn's 2021 The Suicide Squad. Sergeant Rock's cigarette gets shot in half by a bullet, but GI Robot goes into Terminator vision to display all of his Nazi targets in red and goes to work. The carnage is too much for YouTube to let us show, but we do see some eyeballs popping out, some fingers severed, one German soldier shoving his intestines back in, recalling the shot of that American soldier on the Normandy beach in Saving Private Ryan. Episode 3's intro once again has an animated James Gunn typing out the final line of the episode on a final draft script page on his laptop, and the one in this episode is Off from the ground, Circe, you don't understand what you've done, you've doomed the world. And per my gripe with James Gunn for including an animated version of himself in the intro, many of you responded that it wasn't James Gunn who ordered this, but the animators who created this tribute for him. I mean, yeah, okay, sure, but he's also the showrunner, and he very easily could have given the animators a note to cut this part to avoid looking vain. I mean, he's the showrunner. He signs off on everything we see in this show. We didn't have to accept their draft as is. Look, it's not a big deal. I'm still a very big fan of James Gunn, and a lot of the criticism directed at him online is bullshit, but this is just one small thing that he's not above criticism for. Rick and the others find the bride bound, calling her a damsel, even though she definitely went several rounds with Circe. GI Robot finds Nina in a tub. In the comics, Nina's father is Professor Mazursky, who also created the Jake robot that used the GI Robot moniker at one point, but given the timeline and what we know about her father from the finale episode, I don't think Nina's father was around during World War II. In another flashback, now to the 1960s, GI Robot guests on an Ed Sullivan-style talk show, still scanning the studio audience and cameramen for any possible Nazis. Backstage, a general chats with William Magnus, whose work in AI systems got him clearance to study GI Robot. In the comics, Doc Magnus invented the Metal Men, which is a team of robotic heroes. The Metal Men were originally created for DC Comics back in 1962, first appearing in Showcase number 37. Magnus's outfit here resembles his look in the more recent run of the 52 comics from 2007. GI Robot's deeper desire is to be reunited with the boys from Easy Company, Frank Rock, Bulldozer, Little Sure Shot, Wildman, Canary, Four Eyes, and then he adds Bogman, who is an additional character from the DC Comics in 2000, a Black Lagoon monster who was part of the Creature Commandos at that time. In the background of this lab, there are schematics for a more advanced form of an AI system. These are the schematics for the Metal Men, specifically the one named Gold. On the board, you can see the alchemal symbol for antimony crossed out. The Metal Men have their respective alchemal symbols on their chests. robots. A closer look at this robot blueprint a little bit later shows this is definitely the plan to build a Metal Man Gold. We see a shot of more alchemical symbols. Magnus has circled the ones that will become part of the Metal Men: gold, iron, lead, mercury, platinum, and tin. The P and L are not traditionally alchemical symbols, but that is the symbols that they use for the comics. Crossed out include antimony, fire, salt, bismuth, and phosphorus. Near the gold schematics, we can make out the words electronic brain that's been crossed out, and a responsometer, which is a device that allowed Magnus to create the Metal Men. This device gave the Metal Men a conscience and independent thought, something he probably feels like G.I. Robot lacks. Near the chest, I think that reads facsimile heart. Back in the present, the Sons of Themyscira attack the castle. Much of this is way too violent to show on YouTube, but there is one moment when the Sons of Themyscira militant pulls the trigger from a grenade and the truck hits him, and in that explosion, we flash to the inverse colors, and for a few frames into that boom, you can still see the guy's face screaming. When the bride and the others arrive, you can hear a Wilhelm scream. And in another flashback, G.I. Robot ended up in a military surplus store bought by a collector named Stan Fitzgibbon, voiced by Gunn collaborator Michael Rooker. Gunn includes the name Fitzgibbon in a lot of his projects. Sam Fitzgibbon is named after a personal friend of James Gunn, Larry Fitzgibbon. Gunn includes the character named Fitzgibbon in all of his films, including Slither, Super, as well as Peacemaker. Fitzgibbon was the name of Meredith Quill's doctor and one of the cops in the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. Sam shows G.I. Robot his collection. We see an Enlist in the Waves poster. The Waves are the women accepted for voluntary emergency service. They were part of the U.S. Naval Reserve that recruited women to free up the male sailors for active duty during the war. We see a rising sun Imperial Japanese flag, which was the flag of the Japanese Imperial Army before and during World War II. Also on the left wall, a poster for the movie The Longest Day, a historical war drama film from 1962 that chronicles the D-Day landings at Normandy. It had a huge bevy of stars, including John Wayne and Robert Mitchum, Richard Burton, Sean Connery, Henry Fonda, and Robert Wagner, to name a few. We see some Japanese World War II naval binoculars on the left in the foreground, and then one patch of the wall kind of looks like an Army 2nd Cavalry Division from World War II. They watched this scene from the climax of The Dirty Dozen in 1967. James Gunn based the 2021 Suicide Squad film on The Dirty Dozen, but then Sam drives them out to a gathering of white supremacists. One guy has an 88 tattoo, which is associated with white supremacists because it corresponds with HH, as in, you know. Another man is dressed in a German brown shirt uniform from World War II, and we learn that this is Hub City National Socialist Club. In the DC Comics, Hub City is where the vigilante The Question, aka Vic Sage, comes from. From here, we intercut from G.I. Robot's present fight to his massacre of the neo-Nazis, set to the song Coin-Operated Boy by the Dresden Dolls. G.I. Robot smiles a bit during these mirrored sequences, and he's finally returning to his prime directive of killing Nazis. In the present day, his midsection detaches and hovers, making me wonder if Doc Magnus added this upgrade. He gets arrested, and he flashes through different highlights of his existence, including being in Times Square for the famous VJ Day photo, just to the side of the guy with his hands in his pockets from that photo. Great attention to detail there. We also see the day he was unveiled to the public at what looks like a World's Fair, maybe the one in Flushing in 1939. But now he's convicted in a trial for second-degree murder. He's taken into Belle Reve, passing Aquaman villain The Fisherman, who uses a pressurized suit and high-tech equipment looking fishing reels. There's also Doom Patrol villain Animal Vegetable Mineral Man and Wonder Woman villain Crimson Centipede. On the far right, you can also see Shaggy Man, a monster created by Professor Evo who can adapt any assault against him, from JLA issue number 45 from June 1966. Days, months, and years pass as G.I. Robot collects dust, and in his story, I believe, we see an analog for the Forgotten American Veteran, a government instrument programmed to be a killing machine, unable to assimilate into society, falling victim to the private sector, and even when given a second wind, tries to do the right thing, but just becomes another statistic in America's overcrowded prisons. His moment of joy is ended unceremoniously by Cersei exploding his head. And in a way, this is how he would have wanted to go out. The smoke clears in the shape of a heart as Cersei floats in. And spoiler warning, but a heart shape will be how another one of these creature commandos goes out in the final episode. Now, Cersei gets close to killing Princess Alana, but Weasel, for reasons we'll see more of in future episodes, goes absolutely nuts on Cersei, claws at and bites her. Dr. Phosphorus burns her face, leaving a handprint, and the bride says,
You wanted monsters. You got monsters.
It's a meta line to the viewers that in a phase of gods and monsters, this is what it means to get monsters. But as James Gunn has done in recent works like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 with the character of Rocket, his central goal is to deconstruct what it means to be a monster. How a monster is just a creature of nature or of science who is forced into the role of monster by a society that doesn't understand them. Nina finds G.I. Robot's head, and as he powers down, he says, "Cheers to the tin," but is unable to finish the words. Cersei, defeated, says the final line that we saw written on Gunn's script page.
You don't understand what you've done! You've doomed the world!
The song over the credits is The Feeling You Bring by Mount Righteous, a band from Grapevine, Texas that has been called an acoustic punk marching band. All right, moving on to episode 4, Chasing Squirrels, a tragic Weasel-centered episode. We open with Alana and Rick after Cersei's defeat.
Do you not think it's best to just bong?
We say bang.
But it doesn't sound like bang. It sounds like bong.
Big clue for Alana's true intentions. She just wants to execute Cersei, and she plays off the sound of a gunshot as a cute little flirty gag with Rick Flag, even though she has personally shot and killed several sons of Themyscira. Unlike other episodes, James Gunn's script page in the opening titles is not updated with the final line of the episode. Maybe that's a way to preserve the heartbreaking reveal of what Weasel's actually dreaming about and what chasing squirrels really means. Back at Belle Reeve, Steve Agee's character John Economos returns. He walks with a crutch because he was injured in the final conflict of Peacemaker Season 1. He says he was fighting aliens, which, yes, they really were fighting the butterflies, but Economos got his injury when he tripped over a small fence. Though, interestingly, after mentioning this alien invasion, we see Weasel chasing and trying to eat a butterfly outside, which might be one of those alien parasitic butterflies from Peacemaker, but I don't know if they were ever this color. The bride clocks this guy with a scar on his chin, spying on them. Later, we'll see that this is Sergei, one of Princess Alana's men, when the bride puts all the pieces together in the finale. But this episode cleverly diverts our attention in this moment by jumping to another person spying on them, Eric Frankenstein. This guy reports on Rick Flag.
He and I fought together in Jahanpur some moons ago.
Jahanpur is a fictional country in the JLA comics where its ruler Rama Khan broke Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, and we just confirmed that Jahanpur is the name of a country in James Gunn's upcoming Superman film, the poor country that Baravia is invading. The word Jahanpur showed up in a high-res still of the Daily Planet newspaper. It's a conflict between that country and Baravia that Superman intervenes in that sets off some problems for him back in Metropolis. Weasel's attorney is Elizabeth Bates, whose name seems to be a reference to Betty Bates, a tough 1940s attorney from Quality Comics, which was purchased by DC. Betty is short for Elizabeth. Bates calls Weasel John for John Doe. She thinks that she doesn't know his name, but his real name that actually does appear in Task Force X records made for the Suicide Squad film, even though James Gunn has said that his name is actually unknown, is listed as John Monroe, as it is in the comics. So Bates, in a way, is probably more accurate than she realizes. We see the incident Weasel is accused of when he supposedly killed 27 children, though Bates corrects that it was only 8, referring to the number of kids actually witnessed by the cops who saw Weasel versus a total number of kids who might have died in this fire, or just something inflated in press reports of the incident. In 2021's The Suicide Squad, it was said that he killed 27 kids. Like many wild creatures seen from afar, we see his eyes glowing to strip him of any humanity from the perspective of the cops, but later we see his eyes are just glowing to reflect the fire and a sense of panic for the endangered children. Waller interrogates Cersei.
We're charging you with first-degree witchy poo and Maleficent in the second degree.
Oh, and Bette Midler in that one movie in the third degree.
That's an actress, John. That's not a character's name.
He's talking about Hocus Pocus.
Again, not a character.
I love this line. So Witchy Poo is the witch character in HR Pufnstuf, and Maleficent, of course, the sorceress of Sleeping Beauty. But I love that Waller is refusing to accept John's reference to Hocus Pocus because she took the time to recall the names of the actual witch characters in those references, whereas John only remembers the actress's name and not the character name, which is Winifred. Like, she's showing how, even in her bits, she always does her homework. Waller also calls Cersei another redheaded waif in a revealing outfit, which I think is James Gunn throwing some shade at the comic book trope from Marvel Comics with characters like Jean Grey, or really we should say Goblin Queen Madeline Pryor, as well as the Scarlet Witch in some comic depictions, though the live-action MCU variant with Elizabeth Olsen hasn't really had revealing outfits. Then Weasel sees the photographs, and his normally askew eyes finally straighten to focus, suggesting that one reason he's been so cockeyed is to prevent his mind from refocusing on this trauma. In the comics, Weasel was a Stanford student who becomes a sociopath and serial killer in a fur weasel costume. James Gunn for a while now has wanted to retcon the character to give him a more soulful existence, in his words. The little girl gives Weasel what must be a Three Musketeers bar. I mean, that silver wrapper, that full nougat center. Yeah, no mistaking that grossness. And now when Weasel looks at her photo, he mindlessly eats it, but I think he's just remembering the snacks he got. Waller lets Cersei into her mind, and we flash forward through nerve synapses into a future vision. Princess Alana in battle armor with scars on her face. Maybe from an attempt Weasel might have made to stop her. Fighter jets fly out from Bukolistan to bomb American cities. This one, at first I thought might be Gotham based on that bridge that's damaged, reminding me of the collapsed bridges into Gotham Gotham in The Dark Knight Rises, but we get a clearer look at Gotham City in the Dr. Phosphorus episode. Ilana's general is Gorilla Grodd, the hyper-intelligent psychic gorilla and top-tier antagonist to the Flash. We thought we saw Gorilla Grodd on that Daily Planet cover in the Superman trailer, but I actually released an update video that showed that it's not Gorilla Grodd, it's a Hammer of Baravia. Gorilla Grodd is mind-controlling the army of Amethyst Knights with their purple plasma lasers, massacring the conquered people of America. This includes a mother holding a baby, and the mother dies, hurling the baby in the air, and I'm just grateful these animators didn't show what happened to that baby. But, you know, maybe Barry Allen showed up and stuffed it in a microwave. Also, the rubble behind her includes the globe of the Daily Planet, telling us that Metropolis is among the cities that were bombed. Again, with the continuity of the show, this is the same Metropolis that the live-action Superman film is set in. The White House is attacked, and Ilana sits in the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk, and I assume that's the president behind it with all of their advisors dead. And then she turns, and a league of DC heroes have been crucified. In the initial shot, we right away see the Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, all dead. Superman's suit is David Cornsweat's suit with the Kingdom Come inspired chest emblem, the New 52 collar, the red trunks. On the far left of this initial shot, that is Judo Master from the Peacemaker series. Yeah, him. In the next shot, that's Diana's tiara bloodied in the foreground, while behind Wonder Woman tiara, we see Supergirl from the left, then Hawkgirl, then Booster Gold, and then Robin, that's Damian Wayne Robin. Supergirl's costume is the Woman of Tomorrow design by Bilquis Evely, the look that Millie Alcock will have in the 2026 Supergirl movie. Then a shot of Peacemaker on the ground. His leg is severed. He's just laying on the pile of bones, not even worthy, I guess, of being suspended on a pike. In the next shot, a closer look at Batman as Vigilante from the Peacemaker series is behind him. Vigilante gets a pike, but not Peacemaker. I'm thinking Peacemaker might have arrived at this scene late and just lost it. After Ilana laughs, there's a closer shot of Superman, and behind him on the left is Starfire of the Teen Titans, and then Mr. Terrific on the right. And then in the distant background, that appears to be a Green Lantern. I think it's Guy Gardner, if we're going by the cast of metahumans we expect to see in this year's Superman. Finally, Superman's cape is posted as a tattered flag, a reference to the Death of Superman comic image from 1992. And the fact that this is meant to be the future, or a future, of the DC universe as that universe currently exists in James Gunn's mind is significant. James Gunn has said that only some of the DC hero character designs we see on the show are final for how they will look in live action. But Superman, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl are already how we know they will look in that movie. Same for Peacemaker, Vigilante, and Judo Master from the Peacemaker series. But my guess is that Batman and Damian Wayne Robin are still open for revision. They bring in Dr. Illa McPherson to confirm Cersei's vision. In the comics, Illa McPherson is a history teacher at Gotham University. Here, she's a tenured professor at Terrebonne University. Terrebonne is a parish in Louisiana where Belle Reve is located. Dr. McPherson is the world's leading scholar on Themyscira, home to Diana and the other Amazonians. John says that Argus knows that Themyscira exists, but Flag says no outsider has ever gone there because they'd be killed, implying that Argus and Amanda Waller have looked into Themyscira. McPherson is voiced by Stephanie Beatriz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the voice of Mirabelle in Encanto. She also voiced Catwoman in the DC animated movie Catwoman Hunted. McPherson reports that Cersei correctly predicted a tsunami that ended up hitting Themyscira, and since this is actually McPherson in this moment, this isn't Clayface posing as her yet, it tells us that some shit has gone down with Themyscira. And in the Flashpoint universe, Themyscira went to war with Atlantis, so maybe Atlantis sent that tsunami. Back in Belle Reve, Nina is bullied by Kongorilla. The vampire he's with is Nosferatu, who did at one point ally herself with Killa, another large sentient gorilla. The duck is Bird Rentals, aka Rubber Duck, a character from the Captain Carrot comics. We also see the backheads of Kalis, a mummy who was a creature commando at one point, and we will see in the final episode. There's also Warren Griffith, aka Wolfpack, another member of the Creature Commandos. He's the one wearing a hairnet working the food line. There's also Chemo, who's basically an evil living vat of chemicals. The egg-shaped inmate in the background is Cheng Tzu, aka Egg Fu. We can also see Orca, and then the creature with the bug eyes on the far right of this shot is Bug-Eyed Bandit. Rick Flag fights Eric Frankenstein in his home, and Rick learns that Eric is completely misreading his relationship with the bride and unable to get over her, romanticizing the two of them as characters in Titanic or When Harry Met Sally, and not really having a true understanding of complex adult relationships.
I don't think that's exactly what's happening in that scene.
On the way to Pekolistan, Nina asks the bride if she plans to kill the princess, and the bride says,
One less human. More room for the monsters to roam.
We are reminded of this battle between humans and monsters, and how monster survival depends on fewer humans to misunderstand and to oppress them. We end the episode with Weasel's memory with the kids. They play fetch with him, and he's so eager to catch the ball that he busts through a door that should have been locked to the school. A local mushroom harvester spots Weasel and assumes he's attacking these kids. Inside the classroom, there are signs for Thanksgiving telling us that this was over the Thanksgiving holiday, and that's why the kids will be playing by the school with no adults there. They find a bottle of liquor primo in a teacher's drawer, so it was really some alky teacher whose fault it is that a fire broke out. When one girl runs to call the fire department, she's stopped by this local psycho with his rifle, which dooms all of them to their deaths because not only is it his gunfire that spills the fuel and causes the explosion, it makes it so that the cops are the first on the scene, looking for a suspect, seeing what they think is a monster attacking kids, and shoots first so that Weasel would not be able to even save the one kid. This is devastating, and the episode buttons this with the episode title.
I wonder what he's dreaming about.
Probably just chasing squirrels.
This, I believe, is a perfect summation to what James Gunn is trying to say about what he thinks monsters are. When you have like a rescue dog that seems just a little too rambunctious, and that pup stirs or whimpers or kicks their legs while they're sleeping, and you assume they're just chasing squirrels, now just think they might just be haunted by some little humans that they were unable to save. All right, on to episode 5, The Iron Pot, an Eric Frankenstein-focused episode. We open on Ella McPherson's classroom, but now it's not Ella McPherson. This is Clayface disguised as a professor who cares far less about playing the part. Hitting on a student in the first row, the student says her favorite things about the Mascura include the statue of Antigone, the poetry of Apollonia, but Clayface McPherson shouts, "Lesbians like Oprah."
What about the lesbians?
Let's bring them out. Nicole Kidman!
I love that dude a few rows back who just has his phone out like, I gotta record this. In the opening titles, the animated James Gunn is back to typing the final line of the episode. Ilana saying, "It's tragic, Sergei. They are being misled by their own government, but we have no other choice. You must find them and you must kill them all." Though the actual final shot of the episode is Eric leaving the cabin, whistling for that dog, Ivan. We flash back to the events of episode 2 when the bride found Victor Frankenstein dead, leading to a fight once again set to the song American Wedding by Gogol Bordello. Back in Pokolistan in the present day, Alexei questions the Creature Commandos' return.
What is threat exactly? Who is threat?
Yeah, it's really the correct question to ask here because there are so many layers to the double crossing. It's a twist within a twist, with Ilana using Clayface to get them to distrust Cersei's vision, to make her think that she's not a threat. It's just really hard to know who of them are really the ones under threat. Outside McPherson's house, Eric sees a cat on a leash as a bad omen, which turns out to be a bad omen for the things that happen this episode. We flash back to the night of the fire and how Eric floated down a river to be found by this old blind woman named Bogdana and her dog Ivan. This is also a new backstory diverging from the comics or even Frankenstein's Monster's Path in Mary Shelley's book, though in that novel, the monster does befriend an older blind man, and when the family returns home, they freak out, and in the film Bride of Frankenstein, at one point, the monster does befriend an old blind hermit who is happy to finally have a friend. Bogdana tries to teach Eric lessons about true beauty, inviting him to close his eyes and imagine his bride, and that non-visual concept of beauty is the beauty she experiences every day, but Eric learns nothing from this. Back in McPherson's home, Eric finds a collection of artifacts. This home is covered in Themysciran stuff. He picks up a helmet and just looks into its reflection to check his teeth. We find the real McPherson murdered, and Rick calls Pokolistan to warn them as Eric childishly interrupts the call, demanding Rick tell Princess Ilana to tell the bride that he's actually a good guy. Meanwhile, Clayface McPherson comes home and Flag tells Eric to hide, but he stubbornly just stands behind a birdcage, and even after giving in and hiding behind the bed, I love that he is just too bulky that even a little part of his arm is still very, very visible. Back in the flashback, Eric brings a turkey back for Bogdana to clean.
I seem to have a way with this shotgun. If I see something to murder, I barely have to think it, and it is done.
Yeah, based on the angle of the shot, he's totally pointing the gun at the back of Bogdana's head here. A hint that he's already planning to murder Bogdana when he's healthy enough to leave. Alexei drives the Creature Commandos through Pokolistan, listening to Love Song 666 by the Urban Voodoo Machine. Meanwhile, Clayface McPherson plays an Xbox, which I assume he brought to her home. This game is Mortal Kombat from WB Games, which features many DC characters as playable fighters, including Peacemaker. Clayface reverts to his natural state. Clayface in this episode is voiced by Alan Tudyk, who also voiced Clayface in the Harley Quinn series. DC Studios currently has a standalone Clayface movie in the works set for a September 2026 theatrical release date. We don't know who will star as Clayface yet in that film. Clayface catches them and attacks right as Alexei drives the rest of the Creature Commandos into a trap, getting another fun intercutting action climax. Dr. Phosphorus punches right through Alexei's head, just like, gah! Even through the back of the seat. As we intercut between the fights here, moments like these are when I'm really grateful that they conceived this as an animated series and allowed themselves to include characters like Clayface as villains, because it's just a delight to see this guy extending his arms and shifting a hand into a mallet to pummel Eric and Rick as Rick shoots holes into him that seal up. Clayface breaks Rick's back, similar to the move Bane used on Batman. As the bride fights the Amethyst Knight, they fly past the billboard for Tobacco's Exquisitos, a brand of cigars that Gunn created for the Suicide Squad and is a tribute to James Gunn's dog dog, Dr. Wesley von Spears, who passed away in 2020. They actually made a similar billboard for the dog for the Suicide Squad film, and James put that dog in everything in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and 2, as well as the Suicide Squad. Dr. Phosphorus takes off his clothes before burning through the tank, knowing that he's going to crank up the heat on his full body, and he wants to put his clothes back on afterwards. Another gory detail that we can't really show, he leaves, middle finger shaped holes in each soldier's head, leaving an eyeball dangling over that scorched hole, just so we can really see it clearly. Erik squeezes his face out of Clayface's mask, looking like Ace Ventura in the fake rhino. He reaches through to the electric outlet, using his own body as a conductor to zap Clayface to death, bringing some thrill back to Erik because, this current is how he was created. This version of Clayface is dead, but either he or some future form must return for the upcoming live-action film. Meanwhile, the Bride kills most of the Pakistan army as Dr. Phosphorus delights in killing them in unique ways, but Nina and Weasel appear to be avoiding hurting anyone. While the guards were right in saying that the other two were the bigger threats, I think it's just because Nina and Weasel don't want to harm. We learn Erik murdered Bogdana, which is extremely cruel and fully unnecessary for him, but this series wouldn't feel like a proper story about monsters if all of these monsters were completely redeemable. Erik, Frankenstein, and Dr. Phosphorus are now just sadistic assholes, and it makes sense for what they've gone through. We end this episode with Alana and Sergey as we see the scar on his chin, and if you were paying close attention to past episode, you'll remember that the Bride spotted this guy on the tarmac at the start of episode 4. The final song through the credits is I Wouldn't Want to Live in a World Without Grudges by the World/Inferno Friendship Society. Next, episode 6, Priyatel Skelet, which is a phrase that translates to buddy skeleton or skeleton friend in Russian, or in Bulgarian, my friendly skeleton. Either way, it's what the girl calls Dr. Phosphorus, and yet another sad episode centered around this character. But we open in our first official look at Gotham City of the DCU, cast in an eerie green glow and flanked by gargoyles and helicopter police lights, though no bat signal yet. This animated depiction reminds me a lot of the opening shots of Batman the Animated Series intro. Remember, with the searchlights over Gotham coming from the blimps? Except the red sky there is now green. Even the horn instrumental music that opens this episode recalls Danny Elfman's theme from the 1989 Batman film and the Batman Animated Series theme music. James Gunn has been getting a lot of questions about whether he wants to make Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson's take on Batman and Gotham from the 2022 film The Batman, the official Batman of the DCU. But for now, James Gunn is maintaining that he wants to keep the Batman as its own Elseworld, mostly to protect it, and he wants to establish his own version of Gotham that could better integrate with his metropolis and the rest of his DC world. For example, would this violent origin story for Dr. Phosphorus, which I love, really work with Matt Reeves' Gotham that we saw recently in the Penguin series? I don't know, but I definitely don't see Sophia Falcone and Oz Cobb existing in the same universe that has seen Starro and parasitic alien butterflies. James Gunn talked to Rotten Tomatoes TV recently about showcasing Batman in Gotham City and Creature Commandos. There was originally a lot more Batman in the episode, but Gunn was hesitant to commit to too much and purposely chose just the Caped Crusader and a lot of silhouette.
If Batman does exist, he already exists in this universe. He's an important part of this universe, and he has an impact on it.
Gunn also says that Batman is already established in the DCU, like Superman, so we're not going to see an origin story for him. Dr. Phosphorus' pre-accident form is Alex Sartorius, and hey, he looks almost exactly like Alan Tudyk. So while I think the live-action Clayface is going to be another actor, I do think we could see Tudyk playing Dr. Phosphorus in flashbacks in live action. Graffiti on the wall looks like it says Choi with a star in the O. I think this could be a reference to Ryan Choi, the Atom, whose costume has the atomic star on the belt. Rupert Thorne is voiced by Benjamin Byron Davis, who played Dutch in the Red Dead Redemption games. He's also in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Gunn also said that Ben is the one who introduced him to Chris Pratt. Rupert Thorne is a gangster from the Batman universe in the comics, first appearing in Detective Comics 469 in 1977. Gunn said that he included him in the series because he needed a traditional gangster to be the ultimate foil for Dr. Phosphorus. Rupert says,
"You ain't going nowhere. Won't you get that through your skull?"
And we smash cut to the skull in the present day of Pakistan as he whistles the show's theme song to take us into the opening credits. The opening credits of episode 6 show James Gunn typing out the script from the end of this episode. They all turn and look at the back of the castle. Nina, well, I guess this is it then. Nina and the Bride step into a French brothel called Can Can. The madam here is voiced by Shohreh Aghdashloo, who is just Nadia Maroney on The Penguin and was in The Expanse and Punisher, Arcane, and X-Men The Last Stand. She's been in everything. I love how when Nina and the Bride first look at all the sex workers, it matches the framing of when the knights who come in see that same room, but with just a few women now missing or in slightly different poses. Waller and John roll Rick Flag into the hospital. John asks what kind of monster dropped him off. Reptilioid, amphibious, simian, mite, poltergeist. Reptilioid could be a reference to Killer Croc. Amphibious could refer to Nina, but also, Aquaman or any of the Atlanteans, or some of the other species that we met in those two films. Simian might be a reference to Gorilla Grodd or Kongorilla. Mite could refer to Bat Mite. He's technically an imp, but, close enough. Economos did reference Bat-Mite in the Peacemaker series. Poltergeist could refer to Dead Man, Spectre, Gentleman Ghost, Secret, or even Dead Boy Detectives. Gunn did tweet a Dead Man photo at one point, and he and Gentleman Ghost would be the most obviously identifiable ghosts, visually speaking. Eric Frankenstein hijacks a private jet to Pokolistan, and Dr. Phosphorus finds a home that reminds him of his pre-accident life, and we flash back to him talking to his wife, who's concerned about him continuing his cancer treatment research by taking money from funders in the country of Bialia, which in the DC Comics is a fictional Middle Eastern country where Blue Beetle Dan Garrett found the Blue Beetle scarab, and Black Adam was manipulated into attacking it. This backstory for Dr. Phosphorus is new. In the comics, he's a scientist who wanted to build a nuclear power plant, and Rupert Thorne was funding it. The Gotham City Council unsafely managed the plant outside of the city limits due to Thorne's tax evasion, and Sartorius fell into that plant, causing his powers. But this backstory is far more brutal. Thorne had Sartorius' wife murdered and framed him by forcing his hands into her blood and smearing his prints all over the murder weapon. You need a monster like Rupert Thorne to create a monster like Dr. Phosphorus. We circle back to Sartorius jumping out of the truck, and what I love most about this episode is the inverted chronology with the flashbacks. Like, we don't flash back to them chronologically, but rather like in the order in which these memories surface to Dr. Phosphorus due to the emotional context of the present moment. Meanwhile, Weasel plays with wolves like how the kids played with him. Very sweet. Back in the brothel, the Crack brothers show up. Crack, C-R-A-I-C, is an Irish slang for a good time or enjoyable conversation. Like, what's the crack? It's a common greeting in Ireland. We find out later how these are metahumans. But back in the flashback, Thorne and his goons raid Sartorius' nuclear fusion lab, the equipment he was going to use to try to cure cancer, and I guess share that nuclear technology with fascist allies in Bialia. They throw Thorne into the chamber where he undergoes a similar process as Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, except instead of a god, he becomes a, you guessed it, monster. Back with the Pokolistan girl, the cereal is Krkenikni Vloki, which in Slovak translates to cornflakes, and then Milietko is milk. The girl pulls her cheeks into a skeleton smile, and Dr. Phosphorus recalls his line from episode 1.
It looks like I'm smiling too, but I'm not.
So Patty and Brian Crack have metahuman abilities of lightning, but when Patty becomes violent, Nina and the bride both teach the brothers a lesson. Meanwhile, snuggling with the wolves in the pack, Weasel dreams of the schoolgirl who died and transforms her mentally into Princess Alana, who played fetch with him nonstop in episode 1. Now there's a somewhat disorienting, but I think intentionally disorienting flashback cut here where we go back to Dr. Phosphorus laughing as he leaves his lab, and for a moment we think, whoa, is this after he was eating cereal with that girl in the present day? Because we're worried about that girl. But no, we find out shortly after this that this is right after his accident, which leads to the montage of his dark criminal path set to Wanderlust King by Gogo Bordello. But I think that was intentional. We're meant to worry about what he did to that girl as kind of a clever fake out for later. The guard at Thorne's mansion reads a magazine called Meta Sleaze, which shows a bunch of pinups of models cosplaying as metahumans. The back cover might show Cersei or Star Sapphire. The front cover looks like Glacier, though it could be Killer Frost. Inside the magazine on the right could be a gender-flipped Red Devil or Trigon. On the left side could be a female version of the Question. The Trilby and tire make me think that, but the face of the mask is off. There's also a DC character named Midnight who dresses similarly, but with a red tie and is a male character. Inside, Dr. Phosphorus sees Rupert Thorne doing that Charlie Chaplin bit from the Gold Rush where he made the rolls dance on the forks. Dr. Phosphorus kills Thorne and his family, reminding me of that very, very dark vengeance scene with the cartel boss and his family in Sicario. He kills a guy buying Crispy Bones cereal, absolutely dying for this cereal. This character looks like Dry Bones. While taking over Thorne's gang, we see Dr. Phosphorus exiting the Ice Lounge, which seems like a proto version of the Iceberg Lounge, Penguin's Club in the comics. All of his goons now have glowy skull paint, which reminds me of the Neon Golems gang from Batman Forever. Remember that one? Where they had really deep voices? It was so awesome. The party ends with our first real shot of the Batman in the DCU. Oh boy. He appears in silhouette form with a bolt of lightning striking behind him, recalling the iconic image from the cover of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Gunn intentionally leaves him in silhouette with no emblem on the chest visible, only really the shape of the cowl, the cape, the utility belt, and in general, beef. Like, this is a thick Batman, but we'll see. I feel like the DCU Batman could go through the most visual changes from now to live action. And we find out Dr. Phosphorus is just playing with this girl the same way he once played with his son. Over the final montage, Hey Clown by Firewater plays. As the knights prepare for the battle, the Creature Commandos reunite. The bride calls Dr. P Jack Skellington, a reference to Gunn's old home of Disney, The Nightmare Before Christmas. And finally, episode 7, a very funny monster. We open on the birth of Nina Mazursky, who comes out with lungs mostly on the outside of her body, which can can happen. It's called this or this. I don't know how to pronounce them, depending on exactly the case. Now, in the Flashpoint universe, Nina did have a lung disease that her father cured by turning her into a fish person. Myron Mazursky was her adopted father in that storyline, but in the primary DC continuity, Nina turned herself into a fish person so that she could join a second generation of Creature Commandos, which were other human-turned monsters that she helped create. The obstetrician tells Professor Edward Mazursky that he's one of the world's most foremost scientists. In the comics, Professor Mazursky was the scientist behind Project M, a super soldier lab that led to the creation of the Creature Commandos. Edward Mazursky in this episode is voiced by Greg Henry, who played Peter Quill's maternal grandfather in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. The opening titles of this episode show James Gunn typing the post-credit scene of the episode, Frankenstein. When you think about it, if she didn't love me, why would she overreact as much as she did? Oh God. Erik describes the bride.
Her skin, shimmering, parched cerulean. Her irises like 2 dollops of a virgin's blood. Her lips carved from the cushiony intestines of a fetal pig.
Yeah, using some Mary Shelley-esque gothic horror prose there. The Commandos raid a guard fortress and find security camera footage of the princess with someone we later realize is Clayface entering the castle. After making a long journey, preparing to profess how redeemed he is, the bride just gives Erik no time to talk and shoots him off the tower. She tells Dr. Phosphorus, "Can it, Ghost Rider?" A nod to Johnny Blaze from Marvel. I mean, hey, Marvel's Eternals reference Superman. Why can't the DCU reference by name Marvel characters? A flashback shows baby Nina with a breathing apparatus playing with a plush caterpillar. Edward reads a newspaper, the Star City Star, placing this in Star City, the city in the DC universe where Green Arrow lives and operates. Nina's mother Lily doesn't consider the machine Edward made for Nina to equate to Nina being alive and can't handle the idea of Edward building upgrades and says that it's not too late for them to take this girl off the support. Good Lord, too many kids die or are threatened on this show. As Lily leaves, the vibration on the floor causes Nina to tip over and she can't get up. Oh God. Look, I know flawed moms exist out there. I just would have liked to see this script suggest that Lily might have been going through postpartum depression rather than paint her as just a freaked out mom who doesn't appreciate her husband's genius and sees her child as less than human. I don't know, maybe I'm just looking at this differently because I'm a dad now and I see how hard a mom's job is. But I also think about how Steven Spielberg once reflected back on his earlier works like Close Encounters and said that he might not have ended it with Richard Dreyfuss's character leaving his family behind if he had written that movie after he became a father. And you could see that paternal patience, especially for imperfect mothers like in E.T. or later on in The Fabelmans, in Spielberg's films after he became a dad. Look, this is fine. I'm making too big of a deal of it. This is not a Lily Mazursky story. It's a Nina Mazursky story. I just think it's a little hard to watch Nina's trauma originally coming from a mother who was written to hate her just to make Nina's father as a character look so saintly. As the Creature Commandos sneak into the castle, Dr. Phosphorus burns through a smoking guard's face and his cigarette smoke puffs out of his nose after the fact. In another flashback, Edward has built a larger breathing apparatus for Nina, causing her to sweat on a walk to the park. In the procedure, he changes her DNA to give her amphibian qualities and her skin turns blue, webbing forms between her digits, she forms gills, and she can no longer breathe outside of the water. Back in the present, Princess Alana insists on taking a swim to show her people that she isn't weak. Her people, the commoners of Pogolistan, wouldn't see this in the castle grounds. Only her guards are there. Clearly, she's doing this to draw out the one commando who would be able to swim to her, the nicest of the commandos that she might be able to subdue since she's more of a monster than Nina is. Edward brings Nina to Emberton Prep to get socialized, and Nina tries to play lacrosse but gets bullied by some Regina Georges out there. Some boys call her the B word and tell her to say ribbit, explaining why she snapped against the Crack brothers when they called a sex worker that. When we return to Nina and the others on the other side of the scene with Waller and Rick, we see a frog ribbiting, and from that frog, Nina returns to memories of her school while I Am All I Got by Dead Brothers plays of a boy she thought liked her, leaving a frog in her locker. Her bedroom has a tank with a pump for fresh water. We can also see a poster for Nirvana and I think one of Gogo Bordello. She runs away and leaves a goodbye note for her father, Edward. Nina's entry into a life underground in the sewers and a water treatment tunnel match cuts with Ilana's high dive and her luxurious swim. That freedom that Nina felt swimming naked as an aquatic being is framed with the privileged performative swim of the princess. Whereas normally this underwater attack is meant to be a creature from the Black Lagoon-esque horror experience from the point of view of the human, with a grotesque creature lurking in the depths and the reeds. Now we share the monster's perspective. She's more afraid of the thing above her, and she doesn't want to be in this position. We flash back again to Nina's life as an outcast, eating fish raw and like Gollum in the Forbidden Pool, but a photographer turns into an urban legend in Star City. When Edward sees this on the news, we can see he still has a box of Nina's toddler toys on the floor. It's so sad. The news report says animal control is brought in from Metropolis and Bloodhaven. We know Metropolis. Bloodhaven is a New Jersey city close to Gotham City. It was home to Nightwing when he goes solo. Edward finds Nina being captured and he pushes past the cops, leading to a cop shooting him. This cop with the goatee actually reminds me of the other bald cop with the goatee who was one of the two who shot at Weasel in his flashback. Could it be the same guy? Are all cops who look like this just a little too trigger happy? Nina is unable to scream because she can't breathe air, releasing pained wheezes like she did when her body first transformed as a girl. As Alana swims, we hear People Are Strange, originally by The Doors, but covered here by Johnny Hollow. You might remember the Doors version of the song from one of the trailers for billion-dollar hit Morbius. Weasel has linked Alana with the girl that he knew, and he goes out to try to warn her, but remember, it was established in the Suicide Squad that he can't swim. Oh no! Alana and Nina struggle in the water, but Alana takes the dagger and stabs her, doing a kind of underwater version of Bucky Barnes dropping the dagger and catching it midair, and her eyes look evil. But when she rises from the water covered in Nina's blood, she switches to looking like an innocent victim. The bride confronts the princess, who has a pink hologram globe in her room that seems to be pointing to 3 different locations on the earth. One's in northern Africa, maybe Bialia or Jahanpur. Another's in South America, maybe Corto Maltese. And since there are 3, I don't know, maybe these are suspected locations of 3 mother boxes. The document that Alana signs, we tried to translate with Google Translate. It seems to be a treaty, the end of which it says that if there is any dispute between the 2 parties related to the work, it will be settled in court. On Alana's bookshelf, the bride finds Don Quixote, Wuthering Heights, Jacques Le Fataliste, the first Don Quixote, Cervantes' novel about a noble knight driven by delusions of grandeur, of chivalry, lying to himself. Wuthering Heights, a love story between Catherine and Heathcliff, which ends tragically as Catherine marries a richer man despite loving Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is driven by obsession and revenge, reminding us of Eric in The Bride. The third is a comic novel about a servant asked to recount tales of his loves, interrupted by other odd characters. Then Mary Shelley's Matilda, a story of a dying woman whose father was incestuously in love with her, which does connect in some ways to the Bride story, whose father/creator did seemingly fall in love with her, and they certainly did it. Obviously, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein as well. We learn that it's a twist within a twist. Cersei was right about the princess, but when Rick Flag refused to execute Cersei and be done with it, the princess had to make it look like Cersei's visions couldn't be trusted by inserting Clayface in the mix. This is some classic Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes mystery catharsis double twisting, reminding me of the double twist in Knives Out, where Marta thought she had given Harlan a fatal dosage by mistake, when in reality, because Ransom had already meddled with her serums, she had actually given Harlan the correct dosage, and she panicked over nothing. But it meant that Harlan's death was caused by suicide, not murder, and his updated will was legally binding so that Marta could inherit his estate. But the bride closes the loop by shooting the princess. This shot reminds me a lot of the end of the Suicide Squad, where Bloodsport shoots Peacemaker in a slow motion shot. James Gunn just loves ending stories with a slow motion Mexican standoff. Back in Belle Reve, we meet the new team. Dr. Phosphorus plays ping pong with Nosferatu. Kalis knits. Weasel is there, and an upgraded GI robot, much bigger, reminding us of Alpha Groot in the Guardians of Volume 3 post-credit scene. And finally, King Shark returns from the Suicide Squad, voiced here by Diedrich Bader instead of by Sylvester Stallone. The end credit song is Hey God by Juke Baritone, and in the post-credit scene, Eric Frankenstein has been fixed up by another old Russian lady. I think that's his lookout from the earlier episodes. He still cannot take the hint from the bride, but he has to eat sparrow dropping soup, reminding me of the post-credit scene of Aquaman the Lost Kingdom when Orm eats a cheeseburger with a cockroach on it. Hey, reminder, the new Rockstars now has a channel membership. Please click that join button if you're able to, because one of our tiers now gives early access to ad-free versions of special breakdowns, including all of our rewatch series. In a few months, we're going to be doing a rewatch of Christopher Reeve's Superman films, and it's a great way to support us if you're able to do it. Thanks again. Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. If you've heard some banging, it's because Santa Ana winds are crazy in Los Angeles today. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.